All right, guys, how's it going? Welcome back to Fiction Author Business School. We are going to continue our series on pacing. Last week, I talked about pacing and the story feeling too slow and too sluggish, right? Well, we're going to talk about the opposite problem today. We are going to talk about the story feeling too fast. Like it's going too fast, like events are happening too quickly, like the reader does not have time to really connect with the character, all of that. So if you have ever had trouble with this or worry that you might in the future, then stay tuned because we're going to talk about all things to do with when your story is happening too fast and you need to slow it down. Okay? Do you yearn to make your living from writing fiction? Do you struggle to finish your manuscript due to block, indecision, or lack of confidence in your story? Have you already published books that just aren't getting the sales you'd like? The truth is, the thing that really makes a difference in book sales is not currently being taught in the fiction author space. And it comes from the story level, not the marketing level. Real talk, if you don't get it right at the story level, no amount of awesome marketing is going to make your book a bestseller. Hi, I'm Liesl. I've got 20 fiction books, 4 genres, the USA Today bestseller accolade, and multiple award wins under my belt. So, obviously I've been around the block a few times. I have a lot of readers that follow me from genre to genre, even though conventional wisdom says that's rare. Why? Because my readers know that I know how to tell a story that's going to make them feel something. And if you can master that skill, you can write anything you want for the rest of your life and know it will be well received by readers. Which means better reviews, more gushing, more mega fans, and best of all, more royalties for you. Grab your fuzzy slippers and your chocolate of choice. I'm going to teach you how to emotionally engineer your story into the hearts and minds of your readers on purpose. Let's go. Okay, so there's really 3 ways this might look, okay? 3 ways to know if maybe your pacing is too fast. One is that the events are happening too quickly and it's not giving time enough for readers to connect with the characters. In other words, they're not very well invested. And I actually have a little bit of a personal story about this. So years ago, a particular movie came out. I was going to name it, but maybe it doesn't really matter. It was kind of an epic historical, and I actually love epic historical films. They're one of my favorite things to watch. So I was really excited about this film. Well, about 10 minutes in, we got to one of those massive epic battles, you know, the kind where you have the army on both sides and they're facing each other and it's a historical era and people are giving these really inspirational speeches before a battle. And usually those scenes are like the best ones in the story, right? They're the ones that are really fun to watch. But let me tell you, in this case, I just didn't care. And it's because we hadn't gotten to know the character well enough. We didn't know why this battle was important to them. We didn't know why they were going into this battle. You know, we hadn't seen them toil and, you know, the background behind why these two sides were fighting and what everyone's motivation was. They didn't tell us any of that. They literally introduced us to the characters and then threw us into the battle. And I just did not care. Okay, you don't want that to happen in your book. And it can happen with other things other than battles, but you definitely don't want that to happen. Another thing that might happen is that maybe your emotional beats don't land because there's no time to process them. So this is not something that I actually talk about very much because it almost feels like it undermines everything from the get-go. But let's put it this way. You can use all of the templates that you want. You can even use my 10 plot point template and put all the plot points in. But if you're going too fast and you don't allow the reader to emotionally process each of the beats, it's not going to matter. You might as well not put that beat in. Okay. So I've literally seen things where authors say, no, I have all the beats. See, they're here, and here, but they go past them. They fly past them so fast in their story that the reader's not recognizing that. They're not connecting to it emotionally. Okay. So you've got to slow it down and give the reader time to connect to that beat emotionally. And then the other thing is that the story feels rushed. We especially tend to see this right up before the climactic moment because you as the author, you're like rushing to that climax and you're not giving enough logical steps on the way to get there. And again, you're just not giving the reader time to process the story along the way. So ask yourself if you've ever had any of these problems or even worried about any of these problems, whether you knew for sure that you had them or not. Some common things that writers do to fix the problems. Sometimes they just throw scenes in, like they know they're rushing too fast, maybe for that last one where they're rushing toward the climactic moment. So they'll just put filler scenes in to try and slow things down. But a filler scene is a filler scene. If anything, it's going to make it worse, right? Because it's not going to be effectual. It's not going to be tied very well to the story. It's going to end up being boring. So you don't want to do that. They might, in order to try in an attempt to help the reader connect better with the story, give backstory, but a lot of times that ends up in an info dump. I talked about info dumps in last week's episode too. You don't want to be doing that, okay? That's actually going to make your pacing worse, not better. So no info dumps. And then the other things is they might over-explain the scene rather than let it unfold naturally. And they might over-explain the story. It's the epitome of telling rather than showing, okay? So it's going too fast. You're trying to slow it down. So you start going, oh, well, the character is doing this because of this. And you're just like over explaining rather than naturally unfolding the story for the reader. You see what I mean? None of those things are going to work. They're not going to fix your pacing problem. In some cases, they might make it worse, but really what they're going to do is set you up with a whole nother set of problems, which is having filler scenes, info dumps, and telling rather than showing. And all of those are things that I know that you know you're not supposed to be doing, right? So those are not going to help. So the next question is then, what actually will help to fix your pacing problem when you're going too fast? Well, let's go through these problem by problem. In terms of the events happening too quickly, not giving the readers time to connect with the characters, this really is a story structure problem, okay? Use my 10 plot points. I will make sure and link those up in the show notes to make sure that you have all of the beats of the story. Honestly, guys, using those 10 plot points, making sure that you have them all and filling them in if you don't, that naturally sets a pace for your story. And it is a very high level pace because there's only 10 plot points, right? It's not your entire story. It's just a skeleton of your story. But that is where your pacing begins, to make sure that you've hit all of those beats, because they are not only plot beats, they're also emotional beats that the reader can connect with, okay? Something to keep in mind. So if events are happening too quickly, then chances are you're missing some plot points. In terms of that example that I gave in the film that had the battle happen too soon, I can tell you that they started, so world before, and then they introduced the conflict, and then they skipped over a bunch of them and dropped us right into, I mean, I suppose you could call it an escalation, but it almost feels like they tried to put a climactic scene in the first act of the story. And it's just like, okay, there's a reason we don't do that. It's not just because we're all sticklers and adhering to some ancient story structure. It's because that really doesn't work. And your reader is not going to connect with the story if you do that, okay? But my point is that that's a story structure problem. They're missing plot points. In terms of emotional beats that don't land because there's no time to process them, this is where you need to use backstory, psychology, like transformational human psychology, emotional reactions, and internal dialogue to show how the characters feel about certain events and why those events are important to them, okay? So if you feel like you're blowing past any plot point or any event in your story, I want you to ask yourself why you're doing that. And chances are it's because you don't know exactly how to write it or how to convey it on the page. And what you're probably missing is the emotion. So ask yourself, what is the motivation here? Why is the character doing this? What are they feeling at this moment? What are they trying to accomplish at this moment? How do they feel now? How do I want them to feel after that, after the event? You know, just really hash out the emotions and the motivations around the event. And that will help you to write it more effectively, and then you won't be just blowing past it because you don't know what else to say about it, right? Incidentally, this is something that I teach inside Fiction by Design. I teach you all of the internal and emotional things, and this is exactly what we're trying to avoid. We need to make sure that we're getting all of the deep emotions in every single scene so that we're really keeping the reader engaged in our story and we're not losing them, okay? Because unfortunately, pacing is one way of many that we could lose them. And obviously we don't want that. And then finally, the story feeling rushed, especially toward the climactic moment. This is still a story structure problem. I mean, chances are you don't know how to get from the last event you planned before the climactic moment to the climactic moment. So you may be missing plot points there. But the other thing it could be, let's say you do have all the plot points, but it feels rushed between plot points, then what you're missing is the transitions, right? Between scenes, the smaller scenes that are going to get you between major plot events. This is something that I have authors tell me a lot that they struggle with. What you really need is a cause and effect. You got to look at the cause and effect from one plot point to another. How are they going to get from one to another? This is another thing I teach in Fiction by Design. I do a cause and effect plot outline and also a cause and effect emotions outline. Okay. And the thing is, if you're really stuck and you can't figure out how to get from point A to point B, you probably need multiple scenes in between to get between the two. So you might have to brainstorm 2 or 3 events that will lead you logically from one point to the next. So if you're just trying to force it from one point to the next, that's why it feels rushed. That's why it doesn't feel very logical. Okay. So it is a story structure problem, but it's either a plot point problem or it's a cause and effect problem. All right. So what should you do then? Pretty much what I've talked to you about. You need to do your 10 plot points, and I have that free mini course linked up in the show notes. You need to make sure that you're focusing on the emotion, on the character's emotion, on the character's motivations. Any scene that you feel is lacking, go back to the emotion. What are they feeling? What do I want them to feel? What are they thinking? Why are they here? What are they trying to accomplish? That is really what the reader needs to know in order to care about the character and about the story. Okay, so if we think back to my example one more time of this movie, like I said, we didn't know why this battle was so important to him. And it's been years since I literally turned this film off about a quarter of the way through, which is very rare for me, not only because I love this genre, but I'm usually one that will stick it out and kind of punish myself just to watch to the end so that I can say that I gave it every chance, that I watched to the end, and overall, I like to analyze it overall. Was it a good story or not? So I have to watch to the end in order to figure that out. I turned this one off because I just did not care and could not force myself to keep watching. But my point is, it was a long time ago. So maybe they even told us through the dialogue why they were going to war. I'm sure they at least threw that in somewhere, but we didn't feel it. We weren't invested in it. So we didn't care. We didn't understand why these two sides were in this epic battle and, what they were trying to gain from it and how the leaders felt emotionally about it. And so we just didn't care. And it's the, what that looks like in books is I'm not going to finish this book. I'm going to put this book down. This book is boring. I don't care about the characters, right? And obviously, we don't want that. So make sure that your story structure is on point, that you're always getting the emotion in there. And the other one is a little bit more nuanced. It's that cause and effect scene outline. But all of these are things that I can help you with inside Fiction by Design. If you just want to get started in a very small way, then I would recommend picking up my 10 plot points mini course. It's going to start you on a very high level on story structure, and that will actually, like I said, set kind of a pacing tone for you. And from there, you'll just kind of fill in the details and, go more and more detailed further and further down until you get to the scene level. But it's a really great place to start. So this is about why your story might feel like it's going too fast. I hope this is helpful. And if you have any of these problems, try these solutions that I've given you and see. I think it'll make a big difference. I think you'll be surprised how much of a difference it makes. And if you want more help, just be sure to pick up that 10 Universal Plot Points course in the show notes. Okay? Everyone have a wonderful week of writing. I hope that your pacing goes well this week. And I will be back next week with more tips on writing. And I will see you then. Thanks for listening today. If this episode helped or inspired you in any way, would you do me a solid and leave me a review? Reviews help other fiction authors find the podcast. You could also recommend it to a writer friend of yours so they can get the same inspiration you got. Remember, you have a story inside you that only you can tell. So get out there and write your soul story, because your readers are waiting for it with bated breath.